At 98, Mel Brooks isn't looking for applause. He's looking back. In a rare, intimate revelation, the comedy legend names the 6 women who shaped his heart, his art, and his soul. Some gave him romance. Others gave him purpose. All gave him something unforgettable. This isn't gossip. It's legacy. Florence Baum, the Broadway spark that ignited a life. Before Mel Brooks became a legend, before the laughter and legacy, there was Florence Baum, his first wife, his first co-star in life, and the first woman who shaped his journey. She wasn't a Hollywood icon. She was a Broadway dancer, bright-eyed, elegant, and full of fire. They met in the early 1950s, both chasing dreams, both surviving on scraps in New York City. Mel once joked that they lived off $85 a week, but behind the humor was struggle. As he hustled in the writer's room for Your Show of Shows, their lives were chaotic and uncertain. Still, Florence stood by him. They married, built a modest life, and had 3 children, Stephanie, Nikki, and Eddie. Mel became a father before he became famous, and that responsibility shaped him in ways comedy never could. But success comes with strain. As Mel's career took off, their marriage began to crack under the weight. Eventually, they separated. And from that pain came something unexpected. Comedy rooted in heartbreak. His play Marriage is a Dirty, Rotten Fraud was inspired directly by their split. It wasn't revenge, it was reflection, a bittersweet catharsis built from wounds still healing. Even after they parted ways, Florence left an imprint. She was the woman who loved him before the world did, and the one who stood beside him when all he had were dreams and typewriters. Mel rarely speaks about her publicly, but when he does, there's a softness in his voice, a respect for the life they once shared. He once said, "The first heartbreak always teaches you something. Mine taught me how to find the funny in the pain." That lesson would carry him through decades of success and loss. And yet, as impactful as Florence was, the love that came next would become legend. Anne Bancroft, the love that became legend. If Florence was the first spark, Anne Bancroft was the wildfire. Mel Brooks didn't just fall in love with Anne, he fell hard. Their first meeting? Classic Mel. He saw her rehearsing for a stage performance and, without hesitation, shouted from the back row, "Anne Bancroft, I love you!" She turned, smiled, and just like that, the wheels of fate were in motion. Their courtship lasted 3 years. When they married in 1964, Mel forgot the ring, so he borrowed one of Anne's earrings and slid it on her finger. It was romantic, messy, hilarious, and perfectly them. They weren't just a couple. They were a creative force. Anne brought gravity and elegance to his life, while Mel infused it with mischief and heart. He produced films for her, The Elephant Man, 84 Charing Cross Road, and she championed his wildest ideas. Together, they navigated Hollywood as equals, not rivals. For 41 years, they were glued together, as Mel once put it. A bond that endured fame, family, and everything in between. When Anne died of cancer in 2005, Mel was shattered. He later confessed, "Living this life without her is not easy. Great spaghetti, but not easy." That one line, half joke, half tear, is Mel Brooks in a nutshell. To this day, he speaks of her in the present tense. Not because he's forgotten she's gone, but because he refuses to believe that love like that ever truly dies. Their story wasn't just a romance, it was a lifelong duet, one filled with laughter, legacy, and unbreakable devotion. And from that love came a son, one who would carry their spirit into the next generation. Max's mother, love in legacy. When Mel Brooks and Anne Bancroft welcomed their son Max Brooks, it wasn't just the birth of a child. It was the continuation of a love story that had already become legend. For Mel, fatherhood came in stages. He had 3 children from his first marriage, but with Max, it was different. It wasn't just timing. It was the way Anne's grace and Mel's humor fused into a new kind of home. Max grew up not in the shadow of fame, but in the light of it. Anne was elegant, intellectual, private. Mel was wild, witty, and larger than life. Together, they gave Max a childhood filled with books, laughter, deep conversations, and the kind of love that doesn't always need to speak itself out loud. Mel never pushed comedy on his son. In fact, Max went the other way, building a career rooted in dark, speculative fiction. He became the best-selling author of World War Z, carving out a voice that was nothing like his father's, but one Mel admired deeply. In interviews, Mel often speaks of Max with quiet pride, calling him brilliant, thoughtful, and his own man. Still, there are glimpses of that inherited fire. Max's work, though darker, has structure, timing, and irony, signs of a mind raised in the orbit of genius. More importantly, Mel sees Max as the living link to Anne. Through his son's eyes, he still catches flashes of her warmth, her intellect, her ability to cut through chaos with clarity. After Anne passed, Mel once said, "All that I had with her, I still have in Max. That's what love does. It keeps living." And it's true. Even as years pass and grief softens but never fades, Max remains a tribute to a love that shaped not just a marriage, but a legacy. Mel may be remembered as a comedic giant, but the love between him, Anne, and Max tells another story. One of quiet devotion, enduring family, and love that survives long after the laughter stops. And while Anne gave him family, the next great love in his life came from an entirely different place. A bond not romantic, but just as powerful. Carl Reiner, a platonic bond as deep as any romance. Not every love story involves romance. Some are built on decades of trust, laughter, and shared purpose. For Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner, their relationship wasn't scripted. It was organic, hilarious, and profound. They weren't just friends. They were creative soulmates, tethered together by a sense of humor that saw them through everything life could throw their way. They met in the golden age of television, both rising stars in comedy, both obsessed with timing, rhythm, and absurdity. Together, they created The 2,000-Year-Old Man, a comedy routine that became a cult classic and defined a generation's sense of Jewish American humor. But beyond the laughs, something deeper was happening. For years, decades actually, Mel would visit Carl every night. They'd have dinner, watch Jeopardy, and Wheel of Fortune, and just enjoy being two old friends in sync. This wasn't about showbiz. It was about ritual, comfort, and the rare kind of love that outlasts the spotlight. When Carl died in 2020 at the age of 98, Mel was devastated. "I miss dinner," he said simply, as if that sentence said it all. And maybe it did. Because sometimes, love isn't in the grand moments, it's in the daily ones. The dinners, the TV, the knowing looks. Mel described Carl as the person who knew him best. That's saying something for a man who's spent nearly a century making people laugh. With Carl, he didn't have to perform. He could just be Mel. There's something heartbreaking and beautiful about two comedic legends sitting side by side in old age, still laughing at life's ridiculousness. Two men who helped shape the language of American humor, holding each other up in a world that kept getting quieter. And when Carl passed, a piece of Mel went with him. But so did something else, a responsibility. Mel has carried their friendship forward, speaking Carl's name, celebrating his memory, and continuing the work they both believed in, making people laugh and maybe cry a little too. In a world where love stories come in all shapes, the one between Mel and Carl remains a reminder that true companionship doesn't always wear a wedding ring, but it always leaves a mark. The women who inspired comedy, Madeline Kahn, and others. For Mel Brooks, not every great love came from romance or family. Some were born on sound stages, in rehearsal rooms, in the middle of a joke that just wouldn't land until the right woman stepped in. Among them, none shone brighter than Madeline Kahn. She wasn't just a comedic partner, she was a muse. Their collaborations in Blazing Saddles, Young Frankenstein, and High Anxiety weren't just cinematic gold. They were a kind of magic, a fusion of writing, timing, and performance that only worked because Mel trusted her instincts completely. He once said, "I never had to direct Madeline. I just gave her the script, and she made it better than I ever imagined." But it wasn't just Madeline. There were countless women, Cloris Leachman, Andrea Martin, Harvey Korman's female co-stars, whose talents brought Mel's wildest ideas to life. These actresses weren't just filling roles, they were elevating his vision, often grounding the chaos with heart, truth, and a kind of bold vulnerability that Mel deeply admired. Many of them are gone now, and that loss is not lost on him. In recent interviews, he's spoken openly about how much he misses his girls, women who helped him build not just scenes, but entire worlds of comedy. And though they're no longer on the call sheet, their voices still echo in his head. "Comedy isn't just timing," he once said. "It's trust. And I trusted these women with my life's work." To Mel, their connection wasn't about romantic love. It was something even rarer in Hollywood: creative intimacy. A kind of chemistry that came from mutual respect, shared risk, and a belief that what they were doing mattered. These women taught him that genius has no gender, that brilliance doesn't need to shout, and that sometimes the people who make you laugh the hardest are the ones who understand you best. And behind every joke, every punchline, every wild idea brought to life, there was a woman helping him get there. Which brings us to the ones we never saw, but who shaped him all the same. The unseen women, family, fans, and female influences. Behind every legend is a crowd of people who never took a bow. In Mel Brooks' story, that crowd includes the women the world never saw, but who gave him roots, grounding, and inspiration long before the world called him a genius. First, there was his mother, Kate, a Russian Jewish immigrant and widow who raised Mel and his brothers alone in Brooklyn. She was loud, loving, fiercely opinionated, and according to Mel, the first woman who ever made me laugh. Her resilience during the Great Depression shaped his worldview and his comedic bite. He often credits her as the real source of his timing, his chutzpah, and his defiance of despair. Then there were his sisters, teachers, early mentors, and the women behind the camera, producers, editors, assistants, who helped shape his early career. They weren't on stage, but they were everywhere else, keeping the machine moving while Mel worked his magic. And of course, the fans, many of them women, who supported him, wrote to him, dressed as his characters, and made his irreverent brand of humor feel timeless. "You can make a movie," he once said, "but it doesn't become a classic unless people love it back." Over the decades, Mel formed quiet, lifelong bonds with these women, the kind who never made the headlines, but made all the difference. In his memoir, he thanks several by name: secretaries who stayed late, script supervisors who caught what others missed, women who believed in him when the business didn't. These unseen figures gave Mel something invaluable: belonging. They were proof that love comes in many forms: maternal, platonic, professional, even spiritual. Not every woman in Mel's life needed a romantic arc to be meaningful. Some just showed up and stayed, and that was enough. At 98, Mel Brooks is still sharp, still funny, and still deeply aware of who helped him climb the mountain. He once said, "I didn't do it alone, and the ones who really helped, they weren't always in the spotlight, but they were always in my corner." And that gratitude has become part of his legacy, a quiet love letter to the women the credits forgot, but his heart never did. The Ghosts of Laughter. Remembrance amid loss. As time marched on, so did the silence. One by one, the people who built the world of Mel Brooks began to fade from it. But for Mel, they didn't disappear. They became ghosts of laughter, memories that still speak to him through punchlines and pauses. Gene Wilder's death in 2016 hit particularly hard. They had created magic together: Young Frankenstein, Blazing Saddles, The Producers, films that didn't just make people laugh, they changed what comedy could be. Their chemistry was telepathic, their respect mutual. Mel said of Gene, he wasn't just funny, he was sensitive, soulful, a true genius. When Gene passed, Mel admitted, "It was so sad, it made me cry a lot. I still miss him every day." But Gene wasn't the only one. Sid Caesar, Dom DeLuise, Richard Pryor, co-stars, collaborators, brothers in absurdity. Each one gone, each loss leaving behind a kind of creative quiet that no punchline could quite fill. These were men who helped shape Mel's comedy. Yes, but more importantly, they were friends. People who understood him in a way few others could. And then there was Carl Reiner, the last of his nightly companions. Their tradition of watching TV and eating dinner together became legendary in its simplicity. After Carl's death in 2020, Mel confessed that he still found himself reaching for the phone to call him. "I miss dinner," he said, and that one phrase carried the weight of decades. Mel once remarked, "I've lost a lot of my people. The room's quieter now, but their voices still echo when I work." And in that echo is love, laughter frozen in time, preserved like an old recording. He doesn't just mourn them, he honors them through new projects, tributes, and mentions in every interview. They're not gone, not really. They're woven into his legacy, each one a line in a script that Mel still carries close. And from that grief, as always, he finds his way back to comedy. Because in Mel Brooks's world, laughter isn't the opposite of sorrow. It's the cure for it. A love for laughter. His affair with comedy. If Mel Brooks has had one constant in his life, one companion that never left him, disappointed him, or let him down, it's comedy. Not just as a job or even a passion. For Mel, comedy has always been a love affair. It started in Brooklyn, in a small apartment full of noise and chaos and brothers. His mother worked tirelessly. His father died when Mel was just 2. Laughter became survival. "You could either cry or crack a joke," he said once. I chose the joke. That instinct would shape everything, from his first gigs playing drums in the Catskills to writing on Your Show of Shows and finally creating some of the most beloved comedies in American history. Mel's life has been a love letter to absurdity, rebellion, and breaking every rule in the book. His relationship with comedy wasn't always easy. There were failures, flops, and the critics who didn't get it. But he never quit on it. Comedy is truth, he said. It's anger turned into a song. It's grief in disguise. Even now, at 98 years old, Mel is still writing, still imagining, still laughing. He penned his memoir during the pandemic, alone in his house, reflecting on nearly a century of chaos and charm. But the tone of that book wasn't somber. It was joyous, grateful, bursting with memory and affection. Because for Mel Brooks, comedy was never just for the audience. It was for him, a companion in loneliness, a tool against sorrow, a mirror for the absurdity of life. And though the spotlight may have dimmed, his flame for laughter has not. He continues to produce, consult, and celebrate the craft he helped revolutionize. Every joke he writes, every story he tells, is another love letter to the thing that saved him over and over again. Laughter, he once said, is the only real weapon against death. In the end, his greatest romance wasn't with a person at all. It was with the joke. 6 Women He Loved, a dramatic reveal. So who were the 6 women Mel Brooks loved most? The answer, like everything in his life, defies simplicity. These women weren't all romantic partners. Some were family. Some were muses. One was a brother in disguise. But together, they composed the emotional symphony of Mel Brooks's 98 extraordinary years. It begins with Florence Baum, the Broadway dancer he married in 1953. Their whirlwind romance was young, intense, and ambitious. Together, they had 3 children, Stephanie, Nikki, and Eddie, while Mel was still clawing his way up the ladder of show business. Their love didn't last forever, but it gave Mel his first taste of intimacy, fatherhood, and emotional vulnerability. When their marriage fractured, so did part of his spirit. But in that breakage, he found humor. Years later, he would fictionalize the pain in Marriage is a Dirty, Rotten Fraud, turning heartbreak into biting comedy. Then came the center of his emotional world, Anne Bancroft, the woman he saw across a rehearsal stage and fell in love with instantly. "Anne Bancroft, I love you," he shouted, and he meant it. Their connection was electric, intellectual, and enduring. They were married for 41 years. Not only did they share a marriage, but they collaborated artistically, spiritually, and endlessly. She elevated his writing, grounded his chaos, and shared in his triumphs. When she died in 2005, Mel was left adrift. "Living without her is not easy," he said, and you could hear the ache in every syllable. Their son, Max Brooks, was not just a product of their love, but a continuation of it. And so, the 3rd woman on this list is Max's mother, not just biologically, but symbolically. Through Max, now a celebrated author in his own right, their bond lives on. "Our house was full of kisses and spaghetti," Mel once joked, but underneath it was truth. It was a house full of love. The 4th figure in this deeply personal revelation wasn't a woman at all. But Carl Reiner was, undeniably, a soulmate. Their friendship spanned decades, forged in writing rooms and late-night dinners. They watched Jeopardy! Together nightly. They laughed together daily. And when Carl passed in 2020, Mel grieved not just a friend, but a kind of spouse. "I miss dinner," he quietly said, and somehow that said everything. Then came the muses, women like Madeline Kahn, who infused his films with depth, timing, and radiance. She was more than an actress. She was a collaborator, a comedic soul twin. Through her, and many others like her, Mel formed bonds that blurred the lines between work and worship. Their brilliance moved him. Their losses stayed with him. And finally, the unseen women. His mother, Molly Kaminsky. His sisters. The female fans and behind-the-scenes partners who nurtured his talent when no one else believed in it. Women who never held the spotlight, but who lit his way nonetheless. So yes, Mel Brooks names 6 women. But more than that, he reveals 6 kinds of love: romantic, familial, paternal, platonic, creative, and eternal. These weren't just women in his orbit. They were the constellations in his sky. Final act: love as legacy. At 98, Mel Brooks is writing the 3rd act of a life most people could only dream of. He's already conquered Broadway, Hollywood, and television. He's won an Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, and Tony, an EGOT. He's outlived contemporaries, mourned friends, buried the love of his life. And yet, in this chapter, he is not defined by accolades. He is defined by remembrance. This final act isn't a curtain call. It's a canvas. And Mel is painting with the colors of memory, humor, and love. He fills his days writing, painting, and calling up old stories that still make him laugh. Not for fame, not for money, but because remembering is his ritual, his way of keeping everyone he's lost close. He talks about Anne often. He mentions Carl every chance he gets. He names Madeline, Jean, Pondam, and so many others in interviews, in his memoir, and even in Instagram captions. For Anne, always. It's not for show. It's because grief never left him. It simply evolved. His recent memoir, written during the pandemic isolation, isn't just a career retrospective. It's a love letter to laughter, to partnership, to being a Jewish kid in Brooklyn who never lost the fire to create. Even now, he finds himself consulting on new work, History of the World Part 2, voicing characters, giving interviews, because the work, like love, is what keeps him alive. He spends more time with Max now. They share not just genetics, but a creative spirit. Mel is as proud of Max's World War Z as he is of the producers. Perhaps more. "Being a father is the only role that really matters," he once said. And at 98, that role still grounds him. But Mel isn't just looking back. He's passing the torch. Through every anecdote, every project, every joke he tells, he is teaching us something: how to age with joy, how to grieve with grace, and how to love without limits. Mel Brooks didn't just survive the 20th century, he made it laugh. And now, in his twilight years, he's proving that the greatest punchline is still to come. "You can't stop the loss," he said, "but you can choose what to do with what's left." And what he's chosen is remarkable: to laugh louder, to remember fiercely, to live with love as the final, enduring masterpiece. Because Mel Brooks knows something most people forget: legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you love enough to carry forward. They weren't just 6 women, they were 6 kinds of love: romantic, familial, creative, eternal. In remembering them, Mel Brooks doesn't just honor the past, he keeps it alive. Because even after decades of laughter, the greatest story he ever told wasn't a joke. It was who and how he loved.